Today on the Save the Gen Z, I sit down and interview the one and only Faytene Grasseschi.
Always been involved in politics because I am a huge believer in civic engagement. I'm really disappointed in the rhetoric around this, when people say that the debate is closed, and yet at the same time you have members of parliament that don't even know the current legislative status, and when they find out are often surprised. Well, then we know we're in a situation where a conversation is at least warranted. And I think anytime we're edging into a scenario where the government is saying, we know better than parents, we're entering into a very dangerous zone. And I think Canadians should be alarmed about that no matter what the issue is. We really do just simply need to keep our love on, across the board, whether somebody is left, right, centrist, leaning this way or leaning that way.
Hi, and welcome to the show. Today I have the incredible honor of interviewing Faytene Grasseschi. She is the host of the Faytene Show, a Christian talk show, and Our Nation This Week, a conservative news show on the News Forum. Faytene is also an author and has been involved with various ministerial work since becoming a Christian. She has devoted herself to building a better Canada and has recently announced that she is seeking the Conservative Party of Canada candidate nomination in Saint John's Rothesay. So stay tuned. We're going to have a great show. Before we get started with our interview, please subscribe if you haven't already and consider hitting that notification bell. So Faytene, thank you so much for joining me today for an interview.
This is such a joy, such a pleasure. I'm a big fan.
I know there's been a lot of really exciting things happening in your life recently. So how about we start off with you telling us what you've been up to in the last few months?
Just in the last few months, well, like a lot of us who have concern for the nation of Canada, I was very engaged with the CPC leadership race. And, my first choice was Dr. Leslyn Lewis. I appreciated that she was a strong woman running in the race, an incredible candidate. There were many incredible candidates, but I was volunteering just to help her out. And then on the side, I'm a mom, Eli, so I've got a 4 and a 6-year-old, and we also have our national television show as well, Faytene TV, and our advocacy work. And so, there is never a dull month, never a dull day, never a dull month.
That's wonderful. So you recently announced that you're launching a nomination bid to be the next Conservative candidate for Saint John Rothesay, which is a swing riding in New Brunswick. What made you decide to get into politics, and if elected, what would you like to accomplish as a parliamentarian?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, what inspired me to get involved in politics? I've always been involved in politics because I am a huge believer in civic engagement, right? And whether you're an elected official or a voter or just somebody who is talking with a representative on a regular basis on the issues that you care about or serving at an EDA, we should all be involved in politics. And I know that politics has kind of become a dirty word, over the last few generations, but the reality is the decisions that our leaders, our elected officials make affect us all, and they affect the vulnerable, the poor, our seniors, single moms, our families. And so I've always been involved in politics, at least in the last 20 years or so. In terms of running in Saint John Rothesay, I just honestly saw a need. It was in probably the first week of September that there was a lot of buzz, a lot of chatter coming from Ottawa that there might be a snap election after the speech from the throne. Then, of course, O'Toole got COVID, unfortunately, and Blanchette did as well, and that sort of stopped the buzz around that. But during that time, people started to reach out to me, Eli, and just say, hey, we know that you're in the area. Saint John Rothesay doesn't have a conservative candidate yet because Rodney Weston, who ran last time, wasn't going to be or isn't going to be running again. And I just seriously considered it, talked to my husband about it, and we just felt, honestly, Eli, for the sake of your generation, for the sake of my children, that this is a time that we really need to step up, because Canada's on a fast track, I think, in the wrong direction, and we really do need to get things back on track. And so, if not now, then when, was kind of the sentiment.
Absolutely, and I really do hope you get elected. I think you would be a wonderful MP and potentially cabinet minister. So I know that you've had a lot of guests come on your show to talk about protecting the rights of the preborn. As you probably know, Canada is the only, or one of the only, democratic countries with no laws on abortion. If elected as an MP, would you work to protect those who cannot fight and protect themselves?
I think one of the basic responsibilities of an elected official is to protect the most vulnerable in our midst as we see them. And I think, what you just said there, Eli, the truth is a lot of Canadians don't even know what you just said. I remember sitting down with an elected member of parliament. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago now. And we told him that. We said, did you know that you can abort a baby right up until full-term birth in Canada? Now, for me, it particularly touches my heart, Eli, because my children were born at 36 and 38 weeks. And, this member of parliament was like, that's not true. You can't do that. And he himself didn't even know the law as an elected member of parliament. And so, I'm really disappointed in the rhetoric around this, when people say that the debate is closed, and yet at the same time you have members of parliament that don't even know the current legislative status, and when they find out are often surprised. Well, then we know we're in a situation where a conversation is at least warranted. And I'm also concerned that, the climate around this issue has declined to the point that we can't even have a logical conversation and not be called names if somebody disagrees with the other person. They're called a woman hater or a bigot or this or that, and that's just wrong. As Canadians, we are so much better than that. We're intelligent people, we're compassionate people. And so for me, if I was elected, I would just encourage the conversation. Like, let's really sit down. Let's see, do Canadians understand where the legislation is at on the issue? And if they don't understand, once they do understand, how do they feel about it? And, Canada's a democracy. We should be able to have these discussions. And, the one particular thing, and I'll maybe cinch it here, that I'm also concerned about on this issue is the lack of conversation regarding the women who are being pressured and bullied into abortions. I have several very good friends. I feel like this is a women's rights issue, a women's choice issue, because there are so many women in our nation that have been driven to abortion clinics against their will, and have felt like they really didn't have a choice in this choice thing. And so that needs to be talked about as well, because that's not about abortion at that point. That's about harassment of women. That's about verbal abuse. That's about, in some cases, physical abuse. I have a good friend of mine who actually was threatened with physical abuse if she didn't have the abortion. These are the stories that we need to have the courage to at least listen to. And this is one of the things I've been really disappointed in with our leaders, is that they haven't been willing to hear all the stories, and particularly the stories of women who are being abused and deeply manipulated around this issue. And we need to care about them just as much as we care about any woman. So if elected, that's what I'd be about. I'd be about the conversation. I'd be about raising awareness. I'd be about having compassionate dialogue that defends all women.
That's wonderful. And about the no laws, you're absolutely right that a lot of people don't notice. My grandmother, who is one of the smartest women of her generation, she's an author. She's used to host a radio show. She used to teach, and it was a bunch of other things. Like she was just incredible. She was very knowledgeable. We were talking about this one time, and she didn't know that we had no laws on abortion. And I showed it to her, and she was completely shocked that's because when the Supreme Court ruled that the abortion ban was wrong, they gave the government time to put in laws, and the government never put in laws. So that's why we have no laws. Um, so another issue, another social issue that's been in the news lately is the government, liberal government's reintroduction of the ban on conversion therapy. So while most people would think that this bill seeks to ban abusive and coercive, action taken towards children, similar to what we described with what some people do to women with abortion. This is not the case. This bill basically bans all form of quote unquote non-affirmative support services for all LGBT Canadians, even those who are able to consent. And also expressively, it allows for child transitions, a practice that has been disavowed by many psychologists and has been banned in countries like the United Kingdom. Do you think that it's compassionate for the government to limit support services for LGBT Canadians and their families?
Well, I think, Eli, again, this comes back to a scenario where the issue isn't really the issue. Like, a lot of people want to make this about, do you agree with this certain sexual lifestyle or do you not agree? And there's a lot of divisive politics around this, a lot of shaming, blaming, name calling and labeling happening that I really think needs to stop. And I think Canadians are tired of it, and Canadians are bigger than that. So the sexuality issue aside, I think there's a bigger issue here, and that's the issue of just freedom, right? The freedom for somebody who wants a certain kind of counseling, whatever kind of counseling that is, to be able to have access to that counseling. Whether it's going this direction or that direction, people should have the right to have access to what they want to have access to in terms of input into their personal life. And then there's the parental rights issue. I think what really alarms me about this whole thing is, again, I have several First Nations, Inuit, and Métis friends. Actually, I had a chief who actually presided over my husband and I's wedding. He did our wedding vows. I love the First Nations culture, and I'm also deeply broken regarding the injustices that I've seen with the results of the residential schools. And I had one First Nations elder say to me once, basically what they did is they came to our doorstep and they said to our parents, the government knows better than you. Give us your children, we're going to take them, and we're going to re-educate them because the government knows better than the parents. I think anytime we're edging into a scenario where the government is saying, we know better than parents, we're entering into a very dangerous zone. And I think Canadians should be alarmed about that, no matter what the issue is. Canadian parents, they love their children. And we have checks and balances regarding abuses with the Child and Family Services that are doing a wonderful job all across our nation. But there's nobody that loves a child like their mother or father, really. And what concerns me about this legislation is not the sexual issue, but it's the buffeting of parents to have a conversation, the buffeting of the rights of individuals to have access to certain services, and just the shutting down of conversation. That is always a very scary terrain to be going into. Those are the beginning phases of the makings of a very brutal society. We need to be able to have loving conversations and defend one another's freedom rights. So I will defend the right of an LGBTQ2 individual to get whatever kind of counseling they want to, just as much as I will defend the right of a parent to have a loving conversation with their child about these life-altering issues.
Well, that's wonderful, and you make such a good point. My biggest issue with this bill is, like you, it's not about the sexuality issue. It's about the government imposing its values on Canadians. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with people not being able to talk to their therapist behind closed door in a private meeting without the therapist being feared of persecution. I'm very concerned about that. And also a lot of Christian media personalities that and I know have been attacked for their views that are based off the Bible. And they've been called names like homophobic, transphobic, sexist, bigoted, despite not being any of these things and being in fact loving people. However, that's not the case for you. When I look your name up, I have not found one blog, one tweet, nothing that calls you any defamatory names. How do you manage to stay true to your Christian beliefs while not facing strong blowbacks from those who disagree with you?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the internet world for being so kind to me so far then. So, we're entering into politics, though, Eli, so anything could happen. But, I want to say this. We really do just simply need to keep our love on, across the board, whether somebody is left, right, centrist, leaning this way or leaning that way. Hopefully people can smell love, they can smell mutual respect. And I know for me, like so many of the issues, like you drove me the truck right through the front door in this interview, talking about most of the triggering and inflammatory conversations in our society. But if I can't show love and compassion in the midst of the dialogue, then I'm just missing it all around. And so I hope that comes through, when I articulate, and I hope it's a place that we can all come to. Unfortunately with social media, right? Like sometimes people are going off and the person that they're going off about or against isn't right there, right? And so it's easier to be nasty. But I try to discipline myself no matter what to be kind. And I believe that resonates with most Canadians. And I have faith that we can turn the culture of the dialogue around these issues if we continue to keep our love on.
Absolutely. And I do have to say, I think something that contributes to you being loved by everyone is the fact that you're so open-minded. You come across as very, very caring and nice. And you've had different people on your show talk about different topics that aren't typical for Christian conservatives. And I think that's really important. That's what I've been doing too, because I believe that a lot of people are in echo chambers. And when you bring different voices, it really helps bring more people together and make people more compassionate for one another. So a big theme of your show is loving Canada. However, in recent months, there's been a growing dislike of Canada for our past sins against Indigenous and Black people. What message do you have for those who feel like they are not able to love Canada anymore?
Well, I guess it would be the same message I would have for anyone that's been through a traumatic event. And I hope it would be the same message that people would have for me. And that's take time to feel what you feel. Take time to be honest with the anger that you have about the injustice. That it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset about injustices. I think that's just that's a normal human response. But then I think for all of us in life, I heard a mentor of mine say once, we either get bitter or we get better. I think it's important to feel the pain when we go through tough things, but then once we are honest with that, we have to make a decision that we're either going to forgive and be a part of the reconciliation journey forward, or if we're the perpetuator, that when faced with what we've done to hurt people, that we're going to humble ourselves and repent and say sorry. But once that repentance has been done and the perpetuator has said sorry, when the forgiveness is graciously granted, which is really the most difficult, I think, because I think it's easier to say sorry than it is to forgive. But when we can come to that place where both sides are meeting in humility, I think that is the place of true healing and reconciliation, where we can look at each other in the eye on whatever issue it is, and say that was wrong. Now let's work together to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And let's work together to make sure that the healing that we all need happens. And none of these things are quick fixes, right? Like these are things that have gone on for generations in some cases. And so I think that's the hard part, is that, all of us want to see instant change, instant justice, instant healing, instant reconciliation, instant recompense. But the reality is reconciliation is a journey of the heart, and that we're dealing with millions of people who are on this journey. So I think we need to not give up. I think we need to not lose heart. I think we need to do our best, no matter what side of the issue we're on, to stay humble. I love actually that it's a Bible verse that says, love believes the best. And if we can be big enough to somehow believe that even when people hurt us and do horrible things, that it was because they were deceived, they didn't know better. We don't know the circumstances in every situation, but I think that's the only way to move forward, Eli, is if we choose to believe the best and choose to take the hard road of humility and love and perseverance. All these issues need perseverance.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. And another quote from the Bible that I look at when it looks like forgiveness is what Jesus said when he was being nailed to the cross, and that is, Father, Father, forgive them as they do not know what they are doing. I think that some of our racist past, there was an ignorance, and looking at, yeah, I don't even think you need to be Christian to look at the philosophy, the idea of Jesus being tortured, being killed on the cross for being different from those around him, um, and saying, "Forgive them; they do not know what they're doing." That I think that that is something that a lot of people should look and aspire to when it comes to dealing with these difficult situations. So 7 months ago, we entered a global pandemic, which changed everything in our daily lives. I still remember myself. I was in a hotel here in Ottawa watching TV while ironing a shirt and just being completely shocked how crazy every night it would, get worse and worse and worse until we were on lockdown. How has this pandemic impacted you and your family? And how do you think that Canadians, and especially those of faith, should view this pandemic or take away from this pandemic?
Well, well, Eli, I just recently did an interview with Dr. Grant Mullen, and it was on COVID-19 and the mental health of Canadians. And when I was studying for the interview, I came across the statistic that one of the categories of individuals whose mental health has declined the most during COVID-19 is parents with small children and those who work at home. So with small children at home, okay, so that's us. So I think I'm doing okay on the mental illness frontier. But just to say, like, we are one of those families that got the rug absolutely pulled out from underneath of us. And as a matter of fact, that's why we decided actually to homeschool this fall. So I've got a tutor that we hired. It's about the same price as what we were paying for our school fees. And we just said, you know what, we want to make sure that no matter what happens with COVID, we're creating some stability on the home front here. Not just for myself and my husband, but for my children, right? So, we have all had to recalibrate. We've all had to think about how we do life differently. I've heard some people saying, that this has even shaken them up in a good way to make them realize what is really important in life, that they were so busy, that they were running the rat race, and this has been a recalibration time. But we can't deny the fact that this has been a very challenging, very difficult time for most Canadians. Those in long-term care facilities that have been struggling with loneliness and isolation, and some have even died by dehydration and starvation because of the neglect that we've been observing because of low staff levels. And we can go on and on and on. I think as Christians, how do we respond in moments like this? Number one, we make sure that we're in a healthy, strong place ourselves, mentally, emotionally, and all tiers, that our families are doing well. And then out of that position, looking around us and saying, what can I do to help? In Canada, obviously, we've got a huge nation here. We're spread out demographically, but we are connected by this amazing thing called Facebook, right? And so we can be encouraging one another, encouraging our friends through social media, through positive media like this. I just think if each one of us just digs down deep and says, what can I do to love my neighbor as myself, to really be an encouragement to those around me. The answer to how we do that will be different in every situation, but I know every single one of us can find some way to reach out and be love with skin on to people around us that need it and who are lonely, depressed, and anything else they might be struggling with.
Very true. I too agree. The pandemic has been awful in a lot of people, but there's always a light. There's always a kind of a good side to everything. And to be honest, if it wasn't for the pandemic and me having all this extra time, we wouldn't be here today. Because my show, I started this during quarantine. So there's definitely a lot of people have suffered unfairly and unjustly during the pandemic. I think there's also some good things that have come out of it. And I try to look at the positive as somebody who's more likes to be more on the positive oriented side of things. So lastly, and you are a devoted Christian. Can you share how your faith has guided you through your life, and perhaps a moment where you felt the presence of God?
Well, I think our faith as Christians is all about service. right? Like Jesus himself said this, that the greatest of you amongst you will be the one who serves, who serves. And so, I began years ago just picking up malnourished kids out of the bushes in West Africa, working in the inner city streets of Vancouver, pulling drug addicts out of dumpsters, ministering to the poor and prostitutes, of feeding them, just not ramming religion down their throat, but just loving them and meeting them where they're at. And I think as believers, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to serve our communities. And so whether it's in a destitute situation like the ones that I just described, or whether it's through getting involved in civic engagement, I'm not in this to try to ram anything down anybody's throat. I'm in this genuinely to serve. I desire, like you, Eli, to leave this nation, to leave Canada better than I found it. When I look at my children and the fact that before COVID-19, the average Canadian family wasn't taking home $1 for themselves until about the middle of the year, until somewhere between May and June, because before that, if you just do the basic math, all of their income was going to taxes and government fees. And that was when we only had $700 billion in debt. Now we have $1.2 trillion. So how do I love my neighbor, Eli? I think one of the ways that I love my neighbor, one of the ways that I love my children, is by advocating for fiscal prudence, making sure that we're being good stewards of public funds, that we're not writing $50 million checks to our friends through a tweet for some ideological bandwagon that we're on, but that we're truly considering future generations and what the decisions that we're doing today are, how it's going to affect them. And my faith is that it's about service. It's about serving the needy. It's about serving the most vulnerable around me. It's about thinking about future generations, and it's about serving Canada. I love Canada so much. It is just in me. It is on me. I can't get it out of me. I love this nation, and I think as a believer in this nation, my duty is to serve.
Well, amen to that. Faytene, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this interview. And we here at the Save Gen Z and myself fully endorse your bid to be the next CPC candidate out in Saint John. And I wish you the best of luck, and I look forward to seeing you on the Hill.
Amazing. And Eli, I want to just commend you. You are a rarity. It is so rare to see a young person like yourself just taking this whole sphere of government by the reins, being a voice, being present, and being a positive contributor. So I want to cheer you on and say, just keep it up. I look forward to seeing you in Parliament one day in the future.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed this interview. To learn more about Faytene, check the links in the description. And feel free to subscribe and check out my other interviews on the Save the Gen Z. And until next time, God bless.